The significance of the Transcontinental Railroad in America was how Americans used it to get to the other side of the country and build new towns and cities, helping expand America's reach and influence.
Creating the Transcontinental Railroad reduced the travel time between the east and west coasts from as long as 6 months to under 2 weeks. It allowed for supplies and people to travel farther distances, effectively increasing production and communication.
The Transcontinental Railroad fits into the theme of frontiers because it was a new way for communities to rise to importance, or as people called it, manifest destiny. However, the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad led to many other negative impacts that affected both people and animals.
The Transcontinental Railroad was such an impactful creation that it was one of the biggest reasons for the United States expansion to the west.
During the
1800s, railroads and trains were a new idea and were thought to be futuristic. Not many existed outside of the East Coast, but the ones that did were very small and costly. Getting across the country was difficult, dangerous, and expensive.
After the U.S. acquired land out west from the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, more people wanted to move out west for new resources and land.
Then some fortune seekers called the 49ers discovered a gold rush in California in 1849, attracting many, including the Chinese, Europeans, South Americans, and others, all of them hoping that they would strike gold themselves.
With more and more miners coming to California, demand for supplies of their own skyrocketed. Supplies like food, equipment, tools, services, travel, and much more.
Due to all of the miners trying to get to the gold rush, both eastern and frontier statesmen realized the need to connect the two coasts. It was not until 1853, though, that the Congress appropriated funds to survey several routes for the Transcontinental Railroad. The actual building of the railroad would have to wait even longer, as north-south tensions prevented Congress from reaching an agreement on where the line would begin.
In 1862, 1 year into the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln passed the Pacific Railroad Act, guaranteeing public land grants and loans to the two railroads it chose to build the Transcontinental Line, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific.
The two railroad companies began work in 1866, with the Union Pacific Railroad Company beginning in Omaha and the Central Pacific Railroad Company starting in Sacramento, forging a northern route across the country.
The groups that constructed the Transcontinental Railroad mainly consisted of the Union Pacific workers that were made of Civil War veterans and people native to Ireland that were desperate for jobs due to the potato famine. Central Pacific workers overwhelmingly consisted of mostly Chinese immigrants, ranging from 10,000 to 20,000.
The building of the Transcontinental Railroad began in 1863, with both railroad companies building rail lines at opposite ends of the U.S., starting the Transcontinental Railroad. The Central Pacific had to go through Rocky Mountains, while the Union built theirs at a river. Of course, the Union completed their work much faster than the Central due to no steep terrain in the way and to worker competition.
However, due to how fast the Union completed its railroad, most of the tracks had to be rebuilt. When the Transcontinental Railroad was finished in 1869, both companies joined their lines in the middle, settling in Country Point, Utah.
During construction, it was extremely tough on both companies, where the conditions were especially hard on both companies during the winter. A lot of times, the only way to make the railroad travel across the mountains was to blast a tunnel right in the middle.
The Central Pacific Railroad had to blast multiple tunnels through the Sierra Nevada mountains. The longest tunnel built was 1,659 feet long, which took a long time to create, having the blast removed about 1 foot per day. While the Central Pacific Railroad had to deal with mountains, the Union Pacific Railroad was challenged by Native American raids. As the Native Americans came to realize the threat to their way of life that the Iron Horse was going to bring, they began to raid the railroad work site.
Also, a lot of the land that was granted, quote-unquote, to the railroad by the government was actually Native American land. There were many battles between the two groups, the Americans and the Native Americans. This negatively impacted the Transcontinental Railroad, while countless Native American lives were lost. Along the way, people set up hell-on-wheels towns. Numerous hell-on-wheels towns proliferated along the Union Pacific construction route from Omaha, Nebraska to Promontory Summit, Utah. The close attachment to the railroads meant a constant stream of transient residents and a mixing of ethnic groups under the banner of the Pacific Railroad. The towns were often built of tents and cheap board structures that could easily be temporary and may be dismantled and moved to the next location. The towns offered everything from dentistry to hardware supplies to saloons and to prostitutes. Although many Hell on Wheels towns disappeared as the railroad moved west, several communities, such as Laramie, Wyoming, endured and thrived in later years as railroad repair facilities and branch line terminals. These towns thrived due to a constant stream of people, which was a big positive on behalf of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. Needless to say, both companies powered through and eventually worked past each other. On that day, Leland Stanford, governor of California and president of the Central Pacific Railroad, drove in the last spike. This final spike was called the Golden Spike. You can see it today at Stanford University in California. In the image displayed on the screen now, we can see just how many people came to see the driving in of the Gold Spike. This shows how important the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad was. Overall, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad reduced the amount of time needed to travel from one coast to another, decreased the cost of traveling from one coast to another, and extremely depleted the danger involved with traveling from one coast to another, which are numerous positives associated with the Transcontinental Railroad.
making it the best reason to expand westward.